I apologize. I am a little bit delayed in getting everything up and running. This is entirely my fault. Here, switch over so I can say hi. Yes, we are in the process of opening. Let me see. The Hobbit, which as soon as I get open, we will continue reading. Okay. Let's see my bookshelf. Here we go. The Hobbit. We want the legacy browser version of this. I apologize. Would help to have the right one. Okay. YouTube. Let's see. Chapter. Here we are. Yes. Chapter 10. Let's open this right here and see if that's okay. It's getting there. Almost. Okay, so now if I plus a couple times. Okay. Yeah, we can still see the text pretty well. So we'll just slide in on over there. Excellent. Okay. So again, I'm so sorry about the delay. Thank you both. Thank you all for hanging out. I'm doing good. No text visible. Interesting. Thank you. Hold on. I can fix that. I just have to hit the button, and then the button shows all the things. So that was my bad. Doing pretty well. Just the normal grind of trying to get stuff done today. But yeah. So I just I was eating and trying to get ready and outstanding. Yeah, so I was just trying to snag something real fast to eat, and I didn't realize what time it was. So these things happen. Oh boy. Anyway, I hope you guys are doing wonderfully. Today we are going to be continuing our extended reading of The Hobbit. We are on chapter 10 of 19. So we are about the halfway point, a little over the halfway point. So yeah, thank you very much for joining in, and let's go. Chapter 10, A Warm Welcome. The day grew lighter and warmer as they floated along. After a while, the river rounded a steep shoulder of land that came down upon their left. Under its rocky feet, like an inland cliff, the deepest stream had flown, lapping and bubbling. Suddenly, the cliff fell away. The shore sank. The trees ended. Then Bilbo saw a sight. The lands opened wide about him, filled with waters of the river, which broke up and wandered in 100 wandering courses, or halted in marshes and pools that dotted with isles on every side. But was still a strong water flow on steadily through the midst. And far away, its dark head, in a torn cloud, there loomed the mountain. Its nearest neighbors to the northeast, and the tumbled land that joined it to them, could not be seen. All alone it rose, and it looked across the marshes to the forest. The lonely mountain. Bilbo had come far and through many adventures to see it, and now he did not like the look of it in the least. As he listened to the talk of the raftsmen and pieced together the scraps of information they let fall, he soon realized that he was very fortunate ever to have seen it at all, even from a distance. Dreary as had been his imprisonment, and unpleasant as was his position, to say nothing of the poor dwarves underneath him, still he had been more lucky than he guessed. The talk was all of the trade that came and went on the waterways, and the growth of the traffic on the river. As the roads out of the east towards Mirkwood vanished or fell into disuse, and the bickering of the lakemen and the wood elves about the upkeep of the forest river and the care of its banks. Those lands had changed much since the days when the dwarves dwelt in the mountain, days in which most people now remembered only in very shadowy tradition. Maybe it's a cold welcome. We shall find out. They had changed even in recent years, and since the last news that Gandalf had of them. Great floods had risen and swollen the waters that flowed east, and there had been an earthquake or two, which some were inclined to attribute to the dragon, alluding to him chiefly with a curse and an ominous nod in the direction of the mountain. The marshes and bogs had spread wider and wider on either side, paths had vanished, and many a rider and wanderer, too, if they had tried to find the lost way across. The elf road through the wood, which the dwarves had followed on the advice of Bjorn, now came to doubtful and little used at the eastern edge of the forest. Only the river offered any longer a safe way from the skirts of Mirkwood to the north of the mountain shadowed plains beyond, and the river was guarded by the wood elf's king. So you see, Bilbo had come in the end by the only road that was any good. It might have been some comfort to Mr. Baggins shivering in the barrels if he had known that news of this. If he had known that news of this had reached Gandalf far away and given him great anxiety, and that he was in fact finishing his other business, which does not come into this tale, and was getting ready to come in search of Thorin's company. But Bilbo did not know it. All he knew was that the river seemed to go on and on and on forever, and he was hungry and had a nasty cold in the nose and did not like the way the mountain seemed to frown at him and threatened him as it drew ever nearer. After a while, however, the river took a more southerly course, then the mountain receded again, and at last, late in the day, the shores grew rocky, the river gathered all of its wandering waters together into a deep and rapid flood, and they were swept along at great speed. The sun had set when, turning with another sweep towards the east, the Forest River rushed into Long Lake. There it had a wide mouth with stony cliff-like gates on either side, whose feet were piled with shingles. The Long Lake. Bilbo had never imagined that any water that was not the sea could look so big. It was so wide that the opposite shores looked small and far, but was so long at its northerly end, which pointed towards the mountain, could not be seen at all. Only from the map did Bilbo know that it was way up there, where the stars of the Wain were already twinkling. The running river came down into the Lake of Dale, and with the Forest River filled with deep waters that must once have been a great deep rocky valley. At the southern end, the doubled waters poured out again over high waterfalls and ran hardly away to unknown lands. In the still evening air, the noise of the falls could be heard like a distant roar. Not far from the mouth of the Forest River was the strange town he had heard the elves speak of in the King's Cellar. It was not built on the shore, though there were a few huts and buildings there, but right out on the surface of the lake, protected from the swirl of the entering river by a promontory of rock which formed a calm bay. A great bridge made of wood ran out, where huge piles made of forest trees had built a busy wooden town, not a town of elves, but of men who dared to dwell here under the shadow of the distant Dragon Mountain. They still throve on the trade that came up the great river from the south and was carried past the falls into their town. But the days of old, when Dale in the north was rich and prosperous, they had been wealthy and powerful, and there had been fleets of boats in the water, and some were filled with gold, and some with warriors and armor, and there had been wars and deeds which were now only a legend. The rotting piles of the greater town could still be seen along the shores when the water sank for a drought. It reminds me a little of what's it? Florence, right? Florence? No, not Florence. Which is the Italian city, and why am I forgetting this? Is it Florence? The one that's built on piles? I can't remember. Venice, thank you. I don't know why Florence was in my head. I was like, I know that's wrong, but I don't know why that's wrong. Yes, Venice. Thank you. It's like Venice. Which, if you look at the boat that's drawn here, it almost has a sort of Venetian feel to it. Anyway. But men remembered little of all that, though some still sang old songs of the dwarf kings of the mountain, Thror and Thrain, and the race of Durin, and the coming of the dragon, and the fall of the lords of Dale. Some sang, too, that Thror and Thrain would come back one day, and gold would flow in rivers through the mountain gates, and all the land would be filled with new song and new laughter. But this pleasant legend did not affect their daily business. As soon as the raft of barrels came in, slight boats rolled out from the piles of the town, and voices hailed the raft steerers. Then ropes were cast and oars were pulled, and soon the raft was drawn out of the current of the Forest River and towed away around the high shoulder of the rock into the little bay of Lake Town. There it was moored, not far from the shoreward head of the great bridge. Soon men would come up from the south and would take some of the casks away, and others would be filled with goods and words, and others would be filled with goods that they had brought to be taken back to the stream to the wood elves' home. In the meanwhile, the barrels were left to float while the elves of the raft and the boatmen went to feast in Lake Town. They would have been surprised if they could have seen what happened down by the shore. After they had gone and the shadows of the night had fallen, first a barrel was cut loose by Bilbo and pushed to the shore and opened. Groans came from inside, and out crept a most unhappy dwarf. What straw was in his bedraggled beard. He was so sore and stiff, so bruised and buffeted, he could hardly stand or stumble through the shallow water to lie groaning on the shore. He had a famished and a savage look, like a dog that had been chained and forgotten in a kennel for a week. It was Thorin, but you could have told by his golden chain and by the color of his now dirty and tattered sky blue hood with its tarnished silver tassel. It was some time before he could be even polite to the hobbit. "Well, are you alive or dead?" asked Bilbo quite crossly. Perhaps he had forgotten that he had had at least one good meal more than the dwarves, and also had use of his arms and legs, not to speak of the greater allowance of air. "Are you still in prison, or are you free? If you want food, and if you want to go on with this silly adventure, it's yours after all, not mine, you'd better slap them arms and rub your legs, and try and help me get the others out while there's still a chance." Thorin, of course, saw the sense in this, so after a few more groans, he got up and helped the hobbit as well as he could. In the darkness, foundering in the cold water, they had a difficult and very nasty job finding which they thought were the right barrels. Knocking outside, calling out, discovered only about 6 dwarves that could answer. These were unpacked and helped ashore, where they sat or lay, muttering and moaning. They were so soaked and bruised and cramped that they could hardly yet realize their release or be properly thankful for it. Dwalin and Balin were 2 of the most unhappy, and it was no good asking them to help. Bifor and Bombor were less knocked about and drier, but they lay down and would do nothing. Fili and Kili, however, who were young for dwarves, and had been packed more neatly with plenty of straw and smaller casks, came out more or less smiling, with only a bruise or 2 and stiffness that soon wore off. "I hope I never smell apples again," said Fili. "My tub was full of it. To smell apples everlastingly when you can scarcely move and are cold and sick with hunger is maddening. I could eat anything in the wide world for hours on end, but not an apple." Well, I'm glad that my voice is helping you feel better. That makes me happy. With the willing help of Fili and Kili, Thorin and Bilbo at last discovered the remainder of the company and got them out. Poor fat Bombor was asleep and senseless. Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin, and Gloin were waterlogged and only seemed half alive. They all had to be carried one by one and laid hapless on the shore. "Well, here we are," said Thorin. "And I suppose we ought to thank our stars and Mr. Baggins. I am sure he has the right to expect it, although I wish he could have arranged a more comfortable journey. Still, all very much at your service once more, Mr. Baggins. No doubt we shall feel properly grateful when we are fed and recovered. In the meantime, what next?" "I suggest Lake Town," said Bilbo. "What else is there?" Nothing else could, of course, be suggested, so leaving the others, Thorin and Fili and Kili and the hobbit went along the shore to the great bridge. There were guards ahead of it, but they were not keeping a very careful watch, for it was so long since there had been ever been any real need, except for the occasional squabble about river tolls. They were friends with wood elves, other folks were far away, and some of the younger people in the town openly doubted the existence of any dragon in the mountain, and laughed at the graybeards and gammers who said that they had seen him flying in the sky in their younger days. That being so, it is not surprising that the guards were drinking and laughing by the fire in their hut and did not hear the noise or the unpacking of the dwarves or the footsteps of the 4 scouts. Their astonishment was enormous when Thorin, Oakenshield, stepped through the door. "Who are you and what do you want?" they shouted, leaping to their feet and groping for the weapons. "I am Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, king unto the mountain." "Potato? Potato? Ow, buddy, what? What do you want? What do you want, Potato?" Yes, you have my attention now. Yeah, I love you, buddy. What do you want? Did mommy leave? Is that what happened? Yeah. Hey, what? Hold on 1 second. I'm gonna see what the dog wants. I'll be right back. Potato, what do you want? What do you want, Potato? You clearly want something. You want food? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Dog has food, dog has water, dog has medicine. He might take over the stream. There's a good chance of that. Yes, good old Potato. Hey. Okay. Uh, Okie dokie. Let's keep going. Hopefully, Potato, now that he has seen that he is food, water, and noms, will calm down. Anyway. Where were we? All right, we were in the middle of the action. Like, who are you and what do you want? They shouted, leaping to their feet and groping for the weapons. Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, king under the mountain, said the dwarf in a loud voice, and he looked it in spite of his torn clothes and draggled hood. The gold gleamed on his neck and his waist. His eyes were dark and deep. I have come back. I wish to see the master of your town. Then there was tremendous excitement. Some of the more foolish ran out of their huts as if they expected the mountain to go gold in the night and all the waters of the lake to turn yellow right away. The captain of the guard came forward. And who are these? He asked, pointing to Philly, Killy, and Bilbo. Sons of my father's daughter, answered Thrain. Philly and Killy, the race of Durin, Mr. Baggins, who has traveled with us out of the west. If you have come in peace, lay down your arms, said the captain. We have none, said Thorin, and it was true enough. Their knives had been taken away from them by the wood elves and the great sword Orcus, too. Bilbo had his short sword hidden as usual, but he said nothing about that. We have no need of weapons, who return at last to our own as spoken of old, nor could we fight against so many. Take us to your master. He is at feast, said Captain. All the more reason for taking us to him, burst in Philly, who was getting impatient with these solemnities. We are sick, worn, and famished after our long road, and we have sick comrades. Now make haste, and let us have no more words, or your master may have something to say to you. Follow me then, said the captain with 6 men about them, and he led them over the bridge, through the gates, into the marketplace of the town. This was a wide circle of quiet water, surrounded by tall piles on which were built the greater houses, and by long wooden quays with many steps and ladders going down to the surface of the lake. From one great hall shone many lights, and there came the sound of many voices. They passed through the door and stood blinking in the light, looking at the long tables filled with folk. I am Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thor, king under the mountain. I return, cried Thorin in a loud voice from the door, before the captain could say anything. All leapt from their feet. The master of the town sprang from his chair, but none rose in greater surprise than the raftmen or the elves who were sitting at the lower end of the hall. Pressing forward before the master's table, they cried, "These are the prisoners of our king that have escaped, wandering vagabond dwarves that could not give any good account of themselves, sneaking through our woods and molesting our people." Is this true? Asked the master. As a matter of fact, he thought it more likely than the return of the king under the mountain, if any such person had ever existed. It is true. We were wrongfully waylaid by the elf king and imprisoned without cause as we journeyed back to our own land, answered Thorin. But lock nor bar may hinder the homecoming spoken of old, nor is this town the wood elves' realm. I speak to the master of the town of men of the lake, not to the raftmen of the king. Then the master hesitated and looked from one to the other. The Elven King was very powerful in these parts, and the master wished for no enmity with him, nor did he think... It's him! It's all him! Everyone take him! Then the master hesitated and looked from one to the other. The Elven King was very powerful in these parts, and the master wished for no enmity with him. Nor did he think much of the old songs, given his mind to trade and tolls and cargoes and gold, to which habit he owed his position. Others were of different mind, however, and quickly the matter was settled without him. The news had spread from the doors of the hall like fire through all the town. People were shouting inside the hall and outside of it. The quays were thronged with hurrying feet. Some began singing snatches of old songs concerning the return of the king under the mountain. That was Thror's grandson, not Thror himself. That it was Thror's grandson, not Thror himself, that had come back did not bother them at all. Others took up the song, and it rolled loud and high over the lake. The king beneath the mountains, the king of carven stone, the lord of silver fountains, shall come into his own. His crown shall be upholden, his harp shall be restrung, his hall shall echo golden to the songs of yore resung. The woods shall wave on mountains and the grass beneath the sun. His wealth shall flow in fountains and the rivers golden run. The streams shall run in gladness. The lake shall shine and burn. All sorrows fail and sadness at the mountain king's return. So they sang or very like that. Only there was a great deal more of it, and much of it was shouting as well as music of harps and of fiddles mixed in with it. Indeed, such excitement had not been known in the town in the memory of the oldest grandfather. The wood elves themselves began to wonder greatly and even to be afraid. They did not know, of course, how Thorin had escaped, and they began to think that their king might have made a serious mistake. As for the master, he saw that there was nothing else for it but to obey the general clamor for the moment, at any rate, and to pretend that he believed that Thorin was what he said he was. So he gave up to him his own great chair and set Philly and Killy beside him in places of honor. Even Bilbo was given a seat at the high table, and no explanation as to where he came in. No songs alluded to him, even in the obscurest way, was asked for by the general bustle. Soon afterwards, the other dwarves were brought into the town amidst scenes of astonishing enthusiasm. They were all doctored and fed and housed and pampered in the most delightful, satisfactory fashion. A large house was given up to Thorin for his company. Boats and rowers were put at their service, and crowds sat outside and sang songs all day or cheered if any dwarf so much as showed his nose. Some of the songs were old ones, but some of them were quite new, and Oh no. Man, I missed. I was going to push the ad break. Hold on. We're going to wait a minute for the ad break to finish. Hey, you going to wait a minute? 53 seconds. No. Sorry. For those who do not have a subscription to them, there is currently an ad break going on, so I'm just pausing the story until those who are stuck in ad jail manage to come out. 30 seconds. Hope everyone is doing well. After this, oh, that's right. After this, there was, oh man, what was it called? Geez, it was a, craft story artist, something like that. Yeah. Pikmin's model, that was it. Yeah. I want to read this one next. Get a bit of actual Lovecraft in. But anyway, let's continue. Did I just drink something? Yeah, I've got something to try and keep my voice from dying. There. Now, where were we? Okay. Soon afterwards, okay, some of the songs were old ones, but some of them were quite new and spoke confidently of the sudden death of the dragon and of the cargoes of rich presents coming down the river to the lake town. These were inspired largely by the master, and they did not particularly please the dwarves. But in the meantime, they were well contented, and they quickly grew fat and strong again. Indeed, within a week, they were quite recovered, fitted out in fine clothes in their proper colors, with beards combed and trimmed, and proud steps. Thorin looked on and walked as if his kingdom was already regained, and Smaug had been chopped into little pieces. Then, as he had said, the dwarf's good feeling towards the little hobbit grew stronger every day. There were no more groans or grumbles. They drank his health, they patted him on the back, and they made a great fuss of him, which was just as well, for he was not feeling particularly cheerful. He had not forgotten the look of the mountain, nor the thought of the dragon, and he had besides a shocking cold. For 3 days he sneezed and coughed, and he could not go out, even after his speeches at banquets were limited to much. In the meanwhile, the wood elves had gone back to the forest river with their cargoes, and there was great excitement at the king's palace. I've never heard what happened to the chief of guards and the butler. Nothing, of course, was ever said about keys or barrels while the dwarves stayed in Lake Town, and Bilbo was careful never to become invisible. I dare say more was guessed than was known, although doubtless Mr. Baggins remained a bit of a mystery. In any case, the king knew now of the dwarf's errand, or thought he did, and he said to himself, very well, we'll see. No treasure will come back through Mirkwood without my having something to say in the matter, but I expect they will all come to bad at the end, and serve them right. He, at any rate, did not believe in the dwarves fighting and killing dragons like Smaug, and he strongly suspected attempted burglary or something like it, which shows he was a wise elf and wiser than the men of the town, though not quite right, as we shall see in the end. He sent out his spies to the shores of the lake and as far northward towards the mountain as they would go, and waited. At the end of a fortnight, Thorin began to think of departure. While the enthusiasm still lasted in the town, and there was time to get help, it would not do to let everything cool down with delays, so he spoke to the master and his counselors and said that soon he and his company must go towards the mountain. Then, for the first time, the master was surprised and a little frightened. He had wondered if Thorin was, after all, a descendant of the old kings. He had never thought the dwarves would actually dare approach Smaug, but believed that they were frauds who would sooner or later be discovered and be turned out. He was wrong. Thorin, of course, was really the grandson of the king under the mountain, and there was no knowing what a dwarf would not dare to for revenge or for the recovery of his own. But the master was not sorry at all to let them go. They were expensive to keep, and their arrival had turned things into a long holiday in which business was at a standstill. Let them go and bother Smog and see if he welcomes them, he thought. Certainly, oh, Thorin Thrain's son, Thror's son, is what he said. Certainly, oh, sorry. Certainly, oh, Thorin Thrain's son, Thror's son, is what he said. You must claim your own. The honor, the hour is at hand, spoken of old. What help we can offer shall be yours, and we trust in your gratitude when your kingdom is regained. So, one day, although autumn was getting far on and the winds were cold and the leaves were falling fast, 3 large boats left Lake Town, laden with rowers, dwarves, Mr. Baggins, and many provisions. Horses and ponies had been sent round by circuitous paths to meet them at their appointed landing place. The master and his counselors bade them farewell from the great steps of the town hall that went down to the lake. People sang on the quays and out the windows. The white oars dipped and splashed, and off they went north, up the lake to the last stage of their long journey. The only person thoroughly unhappy was Bilbo. Excellent. Okay, that was actually kind of fast. I'm wondering if we do one more. Let's see. How long is this one? Out the doorstep. Starts on page 264 and ends 278. So not too bad. Okay, yeah, let's do one more. Let's do one more. Let's do one more. On the doorstep. Chapter 11. In 2 days going, they rode right up Long Lake and passed into the river running, and now they could see the lonely mountain towering grim and tall before them. The stream was strong, and they're going slow. At the end of the 3rd day, some miles up the river, they drew to the left or western bank and disembarked. Here they were joined by the horses and the other provisions and necessities, and the ponies for their own use, that had been sent to meet them. They packed what they could on the ponies, and the rest was made into a store under a tent. But none of the men in the town would stay with them even for a night so near the shadow of the mountain. Not at any rate until the songs have come true, said they. It was easier to believe in the dragon, and less easy to believe in Thorin in any of these wild parts. Indeed, their stories had no need of any guard, for all the land was desolate and empty. So their escort left them, making off swiftly down the river, and the shoreward paths, although all through the night although the night was already drawing on. Marking swiftly down the river and the shoreward paths, although the night was swiftly. Oh, wow, English, reading English. So the escort left them, making off swiftly down the river and the shoreward paths, although night was already drawing on. They spent a cold and lonely night, and their spirits fell. The next day they set out again. Balin and Bilbo rode behind, each leading the other pony, another pony heavily laden beside him. The others were way ahead, picking out a slow road, for there were no paths. They made northwest, slanting away from the river running and drawing. Hey, Papa. Hi, Potato. How are you doing? Yeah? You want to come lay down? You want to take over the stream again? Okay, you can lay down. Good boy. Good Potato. There we go. All right. Potato, Potato, Potato. Well, Utensil, I appreciate the vote of confidence. I don't think I'm quite there yet. I think I need more practice. Well, that is extraordinarily kind. For now, we're just doing things for free. The goal is to get better at this, right? It's just practice makes perfect. So even after we finish this book, I plan on keeping reading other books. So there will be more. There will be more. At any rate, hey, Potato, what you doing? Please do not try and eat books. I would appreciate that. He has a habit of grabbing books off the shelf and chewing on them when he wants to get my attention, because he knows that I'll get attention. Are you laying down? Oh, good puppy. Good, he's laying down. Whew. All right. They spent a cold and lonely night, and their spirits fell. The next day, they set out again. Balin and Bilbo rode behind, each leading another pony that was beside him, and the others were some way ahead. I said that. They made northwest, slanting away from the river running, and drawing ever nearer and nearer to the great spur of the mountain that was flung out to the southward towards them. It was a weary journey and a quiet and stealthy one. There was no laughter or song or sound of harps, and the pride and hopes which had stirred in their hearts at the singing of the old songs by the lake died away in the plodding gloom. They knew they were drawing near the end of their journey, and that it might be a very horrible end. The land about them grew bleak and barren, though once, as Thorin told them, it had been green and fair. There was little grass before long, there was neither bush nor tree, and only broken and blackened stumps, to speak of the ones that had long vanished. They had come to the desolation of the dragon, and they were come to the waning of the year. They reached the skirts of the mountain, all the same, without meeting any danger or any sign of the dragon, other than the wilderness he had made about his lair. The mountain lay dark and silent before them, and ever higher above them. They made their first camp on the western side of the great southern spur, which ended in a height called Raven Hill. On there had been an old watch post, but they dared not climb it yet. It was too exposed. Before setting out to search the western spurs of the mountain for hidden doors on which all of their hopes rested, Thorin sent out a scouting expedition to spy the land to the south where the front gate had stood. For this purpose, he chose Balin, Fili, and Kili, and with them went Bilbo. They marched under gray and silent cliffs to the feet of Ravenhill. There, the river, after winding a wide loop over the valley of Dale, turned from the mountain on its lonely road to the lake, following swiftly and noisily. Its bank was bare and rocky, tall and steep above the stream, and gazing out from it over the narrow water, foaming and splashing among many boulders, they could see the wide valley shadowed by the mountain's arms. The gray ruin in the wide valley shadowed by the mountain's arms, the gray ruins of ancient houses, towers, and walls. "There lies all that is left of Dale," said Balin. The mountain sides were green with woods and sheltered valley, rich and pleasant in the days when the bells rang in that town. He looked both sad and grim as he said this. He had been one of Thorin's companions on the day the dragon came. They did not dare to follow the river much further towards the gate, but they went on beyond the end of the southern spur until, lying hidden behind a rock, they could look and see where the dark cavernous opening of the great cliff wall between them, the arms of the mountain. Out of this, the waters of the river running sprang, and out of it too there came a steam and a dark smoke. Nothing moved in the waste, save the vapor and the water, and every now and again black and ominous crow. The only sound was the sound of stony water, and every now and then a harsh croak of a bird. Balin shuddered. "Let us return," he said. "We can do no good here, and I don't like those dark birds. They look like spies of evil." The front gate. "The dragon is still alive and in the halls under the mountain, or I imagine so from the smoke," said the hobbit. "That does not prove it," said Balin, "although I don't doubt you are right. But he might have gone away some time, or he might be lying on the mountainside keeping watch, and I still expect smokes and steams would come out of the gates, and all the halls within must be filled with his foul reek." With such gloomy thoughts, followed ever by the croaking crows above them, they made their weary way back to camp. Only in June they had been guests in the fair house of Elrond, and though autumn was now crawling towards winter, that pleasant time now seemed long ago. They were alone in the perilous waste, without hope of further help. They were at the end of their journey, but as far as ever, it seemed, from the end of their quest. None of them had much spirit left. Now, strange to say, Mr. Baggins had more than the others. He would often borrow Thorin's map and gaze at it, pondering over the ruins and the message of the moon letters Elrond had read. It was he that made the dwarves begin the dangerous search of the western slopes for the secret door. They moved their camp and then to a long valley, narrower, in the great dale in the south, where the gates of the river stood, and walled with lower spurs of the mountains. Two of these here thrust westward from the main mass of the long, steep, slided ridges that fell over downwards towards the plain. On this western side, there were fewer signs of the dragon's marauding feet, and some grass for their ponies. From this western camp, shadowed all day by cliff and wall until the sun began to sink towards the forest, day by day they toiled in parties, searching for paths up the mountainside. If the map were true, somewhere high above the cliff at this valley's head must stand the secret door. Day by day they came back to their camp without success. But at last, unexpectedly, they found what they were seeking. Philly and Killy and the Hobbit went back one day down the valley and scrambled among the tumbled rocks at its southern corner. About midday, creeping behind a great stone that stood like a pillar, Bilbo came on what looked like rough steps going upwards. Following these excitedly, he and the dwarves found traces of a narrow track, often lost and then rediscovered, that wandered on to the top of the southern ridge and brought them at last to a still narrower ledge, which turned north across the face of the mountain. Looking down, they saw they were at the top of the cliff, the valley's head, and were gazing down onto their own camp below. Silently clinging to the rocky wall on their right, they went in single file along the ledge till the wall opened, and they turned to a little steep-walled bay, grassy-floored, still and quiet. Its entrance, which they had found, could not be seen from below because of the overhanging cliff, nor from further off because it was so small and looked like a dark crack and no more. It was not a cave, it was open to the sky above, but its inner end was flat wall that rose up in the narrow part, close to the ground. It was as smooth and upright as a mason's work, but with no joint or crevice to be seen. No sign was there of a post or lintel or threshold, nor any sign of bar or bolt or keyhole. Yet they did not doubt they had found the door at last. They beat it, they thrust and pushed at it, they implored it to move, they spoke fragments of broken spells of opening, and nothing stirred. At last they rested on the grass at its feet, and then at evening began their long climb down. There was excitement in the camp that night. In the morning, they prepared to move once more, only before and Bombor were left behind to guard the ponies and such stores as they had brought with them from the river. The others went down the valley and up the newly found path, and so to the narrow ledge. Along this they could carry no bundles or packs, so narrow and breathless was it, with a fall of 150 feet beside them and sharp rocks below. But each of them took a good long coil of rope and wound it around tight around his waist, and so at last, without mishap, they reached the little grassy bay. There they made their third camp, hauling up what they needed from down below with the ropes. Drawn down the same way, they were able to occasionally lower one or more of the active dwarves, such as Killy, to exchange such news as there was, or to take his share of the guard below. While Beaufort was hauled up to the higher camp, Bombor would not come up, either by rope or path. "I am too fat for such fly walks," he said. "I should turn dizzy and tread on my beard, and there would be 13 again, and the knotted ropes are too slender for my weight." Luckily for him, that was not true, as you shall see. In the meantime, some of them explored the ledge beyond the opening and found a path that led higher and higher on up the mountain, but they did not dare to venture very far that way, nor was there much use in it. Out up there, a silence reigned, broken by no bird or sound except that of the wind in the crannies of the stone. They spoke low and never called or sang, for danger brooded around every rock. The others, who were busy with the secret of the door, had no more success. They were too eager to trouble with the runes or the moon letters, but tried without resting to discover where exactly in the smooth face of the rock the door was hidden. They had brought picks and tools of many sorts from Lake Town, and first they tried to use these, but when they struck the stone, the handles splintered and jarred their arms cruelly, and the steel heads broke or bent like lead. Mining work, they saw clearly, was no good against magic that had shut the door, and they grew terrified too of the echoing noise. Bilbo found, sitting on the doorstep, lonesome and wearisome. It was not a doorstep, of course, really, but that was what they called the little grassy space between the wall and the opening, the quote doorstep in fun. They They used to call the little grassy space between the wall and the opening the doorstep in fun, remembering Bilbo's words long ago and at the unexpected party in his hobbit hole where he had said he would sit on the doorstep till they thought of something, and sit and think they did, or wander aimlessly about, and glummer they became. Their spirits had risen a little at the discovery of the path, but now sank into their boots, and yet they would not give up or go away. The hobbit was no longer much brighter than the dwarves. He could do nothing but sit with his back to the rock face, and stare away to the west, through the opening, over the cliff, over the wide lands, to the black wall of Mirkwood, into the distances beyond, in which he sometimes thought he would catch glimpses of the misty mountains, small and far. The dwarves asked him what he was doing. He answered, "You said sitting on the doorstep and thinking would be my job, not to mention getting inside, so I'm sitting and thinking." But I'm afraid he was not thinking much of the job, but of what lay beyond the blue distance, the quiet western land, and the hill, and his hobbit hole under it. A large gray stone lay in the center of the grass, and he stared moodily at it, or watched the great snails. They seemed to love the little shut-in bay with walls of cool rock, and there were many of them, huge size, crawling slowly and stickily along its side. "Tomorrow begins the last week of autumn," said Thorin one day. "Winter comes after autumn," said Bifur. "And next year comes after that," said Dwalin. "And our beards will go long until they hang down the cliff of the valley before anything happens here. What is our burglar doing for us, since he has gotten an invisible ring and ought to be a specially excellent performer now? I am beginning to think he might go through the front gates and spy out a bit." Bilbo heard this. The dwarves were on the rocks just above the enclosure where he was sitting, and said, good gracious," he thought. "So is that what they are beginning to think? Is it always poor me that has to get them out of whatever difficulties, at least since wizards left? Whatever am I going to do? I might never have known that something dreadful would happen to me in the end. I don't think I could bear to see unhappy Valley of Dale again. As for the steaming gate..." That night he was very miserable and hardly slept. The next day the dwarves all went wandering off in various directions. Some were exercising the ponies down below. Some were roving about the mountainside all day. Bilbo sat glumly in the grassy bay, gazing at the stone or out west through the narrow opening. He had a queer feeling that he was waiting for something. "Perhaps the wizard will suddenly come back today," he thought. If he lifted his head, he could see a glimpse of the distant forest. As the sun turned west, there was a gleam of yellow upon the far roof as the light caught the last pale leaves. Soon he saw the orange ball of the sun sinking towards the level of his eyes. He went to the opening, and there was pale and faint or thin new moon above him. I'm going to read that one again. He went to the opening, and there, pale and faint, was a thin new moon above the rim of the earth. At the very moment he heard a sharp crack behind him. There was on the gray stone in the grass was an enormous thrush, nearly coal black, its pale yellow breast freckled with dark spots. Crack! It had caught a snail and was knocking it against the stone. Crack! Crack! Suddenly Bilbo understood. Forgetting all danger, he stood out on the ledge and hailed the dwarves, shouting and waving. Those that were nearest came tumbling over the rocks as fast as they could along the ledge toward him, wondering what on earth was the matter. The others shouted to be hauled up on ropes, except for Bombor, of course. He was asleep. "Quickly," Bilbo explained. They all fell silent. The hobbit was standing by the gray stone, and the dwarves were, with wagging beards, watching impatiently. The sun sank lower and lower, and their hopes fell. It sank into a belt of reddened cloud and disappeared. The dwarves groaned, but still Bilbo stood almost without moving. The little moon was dipping to the horizon. Everything was coming on. Then suddenly, when their hope was lowest, a red ray of sun escaped like a finger through a rent as a cloud. A gleam of light came straight through the opening of the bay and fell on the smooth rock face. The old thrush, who had been watching from a high perch with beady eyes and head cocked to one side, gave a sudden trill. There was a loud crack. A flake of rock split from the wall and fell. A hole appeared suddenly about 3 feet from the ground. Quickly, trembling lest the chance should fade, the dwarves rushed to the rock and pushed in vain. The key! The key! Cried Bilbo. "Where's Thorin?" Thorin hurried up. The key! Shouted Bilbo. "The key that went with the map. Try it now while there's still time." Then Thorin stepped up and drew the key on its chain from around his neck. He put it in the hole, and it fitted and turned. Snap! The gleam went out. The sun sank. The moon was gone, and evening sprang into the sky. Now they all pushed together, and slowly a part of the rock wall gave way. Long, straight cracks appeared and widened. A door 5 feet high and 3 broad was outlined, and slowly, without a sound, swung inwards. It seemed as if darkness flowed out like vapor from the hole in the mountainside, and deep darkness into which nothing can be seen lay before their eyes, a yawning mouth leading in and down. There you go. That was a good chapter. I appreciate the shell boop. Yeah, that's a good chapter. I still have some getting used to in this whole reading thing, but it's getting there. Now, I did want to read this, but I'm looking at it and I realize this is extremely dense text. I don't know how long this will actually take, because I believe it is actually a lot bigger than it looks at first blush. Hold on, I'll fix this. Give me a second. What am I doing? I'm doing this, right? And oops. No, I meant to do. There we go. What if we scroll a little more? Okay. Nope. We want to. Nope. That's not what we want to do. We want this and there. And then like this. Okay. Hold on 1 second. I seem to have a message here for something. Okie dokie. Let's give this a try. Oh, whoops, I forgot to transition. There we go. Now you guys can see it. Hooray. Okay. So I saw something about this, and I hadn't read the story of Lovecraft. So I thought it would be fun to sort of read it. However, as I said, it's a little bit longer than I thought. But we can give this a try. I believe what I should do before we start this is I should make some tea. So, I'm going to put up a BRB here. Let's see. Not quite chasing potatoes, but the sentiment is good enough. Let me just select font. Let's make it bold. And, underline. Okay, there we go. And then making tea. So if you wish to make tea for yourself, let me just move this over to here. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to change the color to red. Beautiful. If you would like tea or some other refreshment for yourself, I shall be back in a couple of minutes. Let's see. Can I run? Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a 1-minute ad break while I go and make tea. And then when I get back, we will try reading Pickman's Model by H.P. Lovecraft, which again, I've never read. So we'll see if it's any good. I have no idea. So I will be back soon. Okay. Oh, seriously? Wait, that didn't push that ad break? Ah, Reddit. I thought that playing that would move the regularly scheduled ad. I still don't know how Twitch does its ad decision stuff. So, there's another ad coming in 2 minutes and 46 seconds. So, I think we'll hang out until then. We'll just let it go. We'll get through the ad and then we'll roll from there. So I don't know how much you guys know about H.P. Lovecraft and his I did not let that steep enough. I now have vaguely tea-scented water. That's fine. Yeah, so H.P. Lovecraft, of course, was a miserable individual himself, but was the author of some very interesting stories that eventually became the sort of the grounding of an entire genre of horror stories, right? So what's now called Lovecraftian, after Lovecraft, is he really tapped or aimed at a horror of the unknown. This fit very well with his personal anxieties and probably psychoses, for that matter. But regardless, the stories that he authored tended to have a lot of people going insane, a lot of the whole kind of conceit of Lovecraftian horror is that you don't have, like, there are things in the universe that are simply outside of human capability of understanding that don't care that humans are here. So all the gods and great gods and beings and stuff like that exist in Lovecraft's lore really don't care about humans at all. And humans are kind of are honestly below even the point of being noticeable by them for the most part, right? So it's sort of the vast indifference of the universe, if you will. And an ad is going to start in 10 seconds. So we will not start until after that has run its course. 2, 1. I'll see you back in a second. All right. Yeah. So Lovecraft also had this like thing with the sea and oceans, and I don't know, man. He had a lot of problems. But at any rate, so 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Actually, you know what I should do? Welcome back, and we're back. Okay, I'm just gonna change the name of the stream title to reading. I can spell. Wow, reading H.P. Lovecraft story. There we go. Let's add that. There we go. Cool. Outstanding. Let's roll. Pickman's Model by Howard Phillips Lovecraft. You needn't think I'm crazy, Elliot. Plenty of others have queerer prejudices than this. Why don't you laugh at Oliver's grandfather who won't ride in a motor? If I don't like a damn subway, it's my own business, and we got here more quickly anyhow in a taxi. We'd have to walk up the hill from Park Street if we'd taken the car. I know I'm more nervous than when you saw me last year, but you don't need to hold a clinic over it. There's plenty of reason, God knows, and I fancy I'm lucky to be sane at all. Why the third degree? You didn't used to be so inquisitive. This is an interesting first-person perspective. Well, if you must hear, I don't know why you shouldn't. Maybe you ought to anyhow, for you kept writing me like a grieved parent when you'd heard I'd begun to cut the art club and keep away from Pikmin. Now that he's disappeared, I go around the club once in a while, but my nerves aren't what they were. No, I don't know what became of Pikmin, and I don't like to guess. You might have surmised I had some inside information when I dropped him. And that's why I didn't want to think, that's why I don't want to think where he's gone. Let the police find what they can. It won't be much, judging by the fact that they don't know yet of the old North End place he hired under the name of Peters. I'm not sure I could find it again myself, not that I'd ever try, even in broad daylight. Yes, I know, or am afraid I know, why he maintained it. I'm coming to that, and I think you'll understand before I'm through why I don't tell the police. They would ask me to guide them, but I couldn't go back there. Even if I knew the way, there was something there. And now I can't use the subway, or as you may well laugh at this too, go down to Sellers anymore. I should think you'd have known. I didn't drop Pikmin for the same silly reasons that fussy old women like Dr. Reed or Joe Minot or Bosworth did. Morbid art doesn't shock me, and when a man has the genius Pikmin had, I feel an honor to know him, no matter what direction his work takes. Boston never had a greater painter than Richard Upton Pikmin. I said it first, and I'll say it still, and I'll never swerve an inch, whether either when he was showing that ghoul feeding, that you remember was when Minot cut him. You know, it takes profound art and profound insight into nature to turn out stuff like Pikmin's. Any magazine cover hack can splash paint around wildly and call it a nightmare or a witch's sabbath or a portrait of the devil, but only a great painter can make such a thing really scare or ring true. It's because only a real artist knows the actual anatomy of the terrible or the physiology of fear, the exact sort of lines and proportions that connect with the latent instincts or hereditary memories of fright, and the proper color contrasts and lighting effects to stir the dormant sense of strangeness. I don't have to tell you why a fusilli really brings a shiver while a cheap ghost story front piece merely makes you laugh. There's something those fellows catch beyond life that they're able to make us catch for a second. Dory had it. Theme has it. And Gorel of Chicago has it, and Pikmin had it as no man ever had before, or I hope to heaven will ever again. Don't ask me what it is they see. You know, in ordinary art, there's no difference in the world between the vital, breathing things drawn from nature or models and the artificial truck that commercial small fry reel off in a bare studios by rule. Well, I should say that really weird artist has a kind of vision which makes models or sums up what amounts to actual scenes from the spectral world he lives in. Anyhow, he manages to turn out results that differ from the predecessor's mince pie dreams in just about the same way that the life painter results differ from the concoctions of a correspondence school cartoonist. If I had ever seen what Pikmin saw, but no. Here, let's have a drink before we go any deeper. Gad, I wouldn't be alive if I ever seen what that man, if he was a man, saw. You recall Pickman's forte was faces. I don't believe anyone since Goya put so much sheer hell into a set of features or a twist of expression. Before Goya, you'd have to go back to the medieval chaps or who did the gargoyles and chimeras as a Notre Dame and Saint Michel. They believed in all sorts of things, and maybe they saw all sorts of things too. For the Middle Ages had some curious phrases. I remember you're asking Pickman yourself once, the year before you went away, wherever in thunder he got such ideas and visions. Wasn't that a nasty laugh he gave you? It was partly because of that laugh that Reed dropped him. Reed, had just taken up comparative pathology and was full of pompous inside stuff about the biological or evolutionary significance of this or that mental or physical symptom. He said Pickman repelled him more and more every day and almost frightened him towards the last. That the fellow's features and expressions were slowly developing in a way he didn't like, in a way that wasn't human. He had a lot of talk about diet, and said Pickman would be abnormal and eccentric to the last degree. Suppose you told Reed, if you and he had any correspondence over it, that he let Pickman's paintings get on his nerves or harrow up his imagination. I know I told him that myself. Then, but keep in mind that I didn't drop Pickman for anything like this. On the contrary, my admiration for him kept growing. For that ghoul feeding was a tremendous achievement. As you know, the club wouldn't exhibit it and the fine arts wouldn't accept it as a gift. And I can add that nobody would buy it, so Pickman had it right in his house until he went. Now his father has it in Salem. Pickman comes of old Salem stock. He had a witch ancestor hanged in 1692. I got into the habit of calling Pickman quite often, especially when I began making notes for a monograph on weird art. Probably it was his work which put the idea in my head, and anyhow, I found him a mine of data suggesting when I could come develop it. He showed me the paintings and drawings he had about, including some pen and ink sketches that would, I verily believe, have gotten him kicked out of the club if any of the members had seen them. Before long, I was nearly a devotee and would listen for hours like a schoolboy to art theories and philosophic speculations wild enough to qualify him for the Danvers Asylum. My hero worship, coupled with the fact that people generally were commencing to have less and less to do with him, made him get very confidential with me. And one evening he hinted that if I were fairly close-mouthed and none too squeamish, he might show me something rather unusual, something a bit stranger than anything he had in the house. He said, there are things that won't do for Newberry Street. Things that are out of place here and can't be conceived here anyhow. It's my business to catch the overtones of the soul, and you won't find these in a parvenu set of artificial trees and made land. Back Bay isn't Boston, isn't anything yet, because it's had no time to pick up memories and to attract local spirits. If there are any ghosts here, they're tame ghosts of Salt Marsh and Shallow Cove, and I want human ghosts. The ghosts of beginnings highly organized enough to look, of beings highly organized enough to have looked on hell and known the meaning of what they saw. The place for an artist to live is the North End. If any aesthete were sincere, he'd put up with the slums for the sake of the mass traditions. God, man, don't you realize that places like that weren't merely made, but actually grew generation after generation, lived and felt and died there in the days when people wouldn't have been afraid to live and feel and die? Do you know there was a mill on Copp's Hill in 1632, and half of the present streets were laid out in 1650? I can show you houses that have stood 2 centuries and a half or more, houses that have witnessed what would make a modern house crumble into powder. What do moderns know of life and of the forces behind it? You call the Salem witchcraft a delusion, but I'll wager my 4 times great-grandmother could have told you things. They hanged her on Gallows Hill with Cotton Mather looking sanctimoniously on. Mather, damn him, was afraid somebody might succeed in kicking free of this accursed cage of monotony. I wish someone had laid a spell on him or sucked his blood in the night. I can show you a house he lived in. And I can show you another one where he was afraid to enter, in spite of all his fine, bold talk. He knew things he wouldn't dare to put in that stupid Magnalia or the puerile wonders of the invisible world. Look here. Do you know the whole North End once had a set of tunnels that kept certain people in touch with each other's houses and the burying ground and the sea? Let them prosecute and persecute above ground. Things went on every day that they wouldn't reach, and voices laughed at night that they couldn't place. Why, man, out of every 10 surviving houses built before 1700 and not moved since, I'll wager that in 8 I can show you something queer in the cellar. There's hardly a month that you didn't read of a workman finding bricked up arches and wells leading nowhere in this and that old place as comes down. You could see one near Henchman Street from the elevated last year. There were witches and what their spells summoned, pirates and what they brought in from the sea, smugglers and privateers. And I tell you, people who knew how to live and how to engage the boundaries of life in the old times. This wasn't the only world a bold and wise man could know. To think, today, in contrast with such pale pink brains that even a club of supposed artists gets shivers and convulsions if a picture goes beyond the feelings of Beacon Street's tea table. The only saving grace of the present is that it's too damn stupid to question the past very closely. What do maps and records and guidebooks really tell of the North End? As a guess, I'll guarantee to lead you to 30 or 40 alleys in a network of alleys north of Prince Street that aren't suspected by 10 living beings outside of the foreigners that swarm in them. And what do those Dagos know of their meaning? No, Thurber, these ancient places are dreaming gloriously and overflowing with wonder and terror and escapes from the commonplace, and yet not a living soul to understand them or profit by them. Or rather, there's only one living soul. For I haven't been digging around in the past for nothing. Well, I'm glad I could keep up the themes. Good to see you, Mark. See here, you're interested in this sort of thing. What if I told you I've got another studio up there where I can catch the night spirit of antique horror and paint things that I couldn't even think of in Newbury Street? Naturally, I don't tell those cursed maids down at the club with Reed, damn him. Yes, Thurber, I decided long ago that one must paint terror as well as beauty from life, and so I did some exploring in places where I had reason to know terror lives. I've got a place I don't believe 3 living Nordic men besides myself had seen. All right, I'm going to pause here for a second. H.P. Lovecraft was notoriously racist. I just have to put this out there. H.P. Lovecraft was so racist that people in the 1920s thought he was racist. I am going to read this as is, but just as a disclaimer, he was not a good person by a long shot. This isn't so very far from the elevated as the distance goes, but it's centuries away as the soul goes. I took it because of the queer old brick well in the cellar, one of the sort I'm telling you about. The shack's almost tumbling down, so no one else would live there, and I hate to tell you how little I pay for it. The windows are boarded up, but I like that better since I don't want daylight for what I do. I paint in the cellar where the inspiration is the thickest. But I've put other rooms furnished on the ground floor. Sicilian owns it, and I've hired it under the name of Peters. Now, if you're game, I'll take you there tonight. I think you'd enjoy the pictures. For as I've said, I let myself go a bit there. It's no vast tour. Sometimes I do set foot. Sometimes I do it on foot, or I don't want to attract attention with a taxi in such a place. We can take the shuttle to South Station for Battery Street, and after that, the walk isn't much. Well, Elliot, there wasn't much for me to do after that harangue, but to keep myself from running instead of walking for the first vacant cab we could sight. We changed to the elevated on the South Station, and at about 12 o'clock, we had climbed down the steps at Battery Street and struck along the old waterfront past Constitution Wharf. I didn't keep track of the cross streets, and I can't tell you yet where we turned up, but I know it wasn't Greenboro Lane. When we did turn, it was climbing through deserted lengths of the narrowest, dirtiest alley I ever saw in my life, with crumbling-looking gables, broken, small-paned windows, and archaic chimneys that stood half disintegrated against the moonlit sky. I don't believe there were 3 hours in sighting. I don't believe there were 3 hours in sight that hadn't been standing in Cotton Mather's time. I certainly glimpsed at least 2 with an overhang, and once I thought I saw a peaked roofline, almost forgotten pre-gamble type, as though antiquarians would tell us, there are none left in Boston. From that alley, we had a dim light, we turned left into an equally silent and still, narrower alley with no light at all, and in a minute made what I think was an obtuse angled bend towards the right in the dark. Not long after this, Pickman produced a flashlight and revealed an antediluvian 10-paneled door that looked damnably worm-eaten. Unlocking it, he ushered me into a barren hallway with what was once a splendid oak paneling, simple of course, but thrillingly suggestive of the time of Andros and Phipps and the witchcraft. Then he took me to a door on the left and lighted an oil lamp and told me to make myself at home. Now, Elliot, I am what the man in the street would call fairly hard-boiled, but I'll confess that what I saw on the walls of that room gave me a bad turn. They were pictures, ones he couldn't paint or even think in Newbury Street, and he was right when he said he had let himself go. Here, have another drink. I need one anyhow. There's no use in my trying to tell you what they were like, because the awful, the blasphemous horror, and the unbelievable loathsomeness and moral failure came from simple touches, quite beyond the power of words to classify. There was none of the exotic technique you see in Sidney Syme, none of the trans-Saturnian sandscapes and lunar fungi that Clark Aston Smith uses to freeze the blood. The backgrounds were mostly old churches, deep woods, cliffs by the sea, brick tunnels, ancient paneled rooms, or simple vaults of masonry. Copp's Hill Burying Ground, which be many blocks away from this very house, was a favorite scene. The madness and monstrosity lay in how the figures in the foreground, for Pickman's morbid art was preeminently one of demonic portraiture. These figures were seldom completely human, but often approached humanity in varying degree. Most of the bodies were roughly bipedal, had a forward slumping and a vaguely canine cast. Textures of the majority were kind of unpleasant rubberiness. I can see it now. Their occupations, well, don't ask me to be too precise. They were usually feeding. I won't say on what. They were sometimes shown in groups in cemeteries or underground passages, and often appeared to be in battle over their prey, or rather their treasure trove. And what damnable expressions Pickman sometimes gave the sightless faces of that carnal booty. Occasionally these things were shown leaping through open windows at night, or squatting on the chests of sleepers, worrying at their throats. One canvas showed a ring of them baying around a hanging witch on the gallows hill, whose dead face held a close kinship to theirs. So I get the idea that it was all this hideous business of theme and setting which struck me faint. I am not a 3-year-old kid, and I've seen such things before. It was the faces. Elliot, these accursed faces leered and slavered out of the canvas with every breath of life. By God, man, I verily believe they were alive. That nauseous wizard had waked the fires of hell, and Pigment and his brush had been a nightmare-spawned wand. Give me the decanter, Elliot. There was one thing called The Lesson. Having pity me that I ever saw it. Listen, can you fancy a squatting circle of nameless dog-like things in a churchyard teaching a small child how to feed like themselves? The price of a changeling, I suppose. You know the old myth about how the weird people leave their spawn in the cradles in exchange for human babies they steal. Pikmin was showing what happens to those stolen babies, how they grow up. And then I began to see the hideous relationship of the faces on the human and non-human figures. He was in all his gradations of morbidity between frankly non-human and degradingly human, establishing a sardonic linkage in evolution. The dog things were developed from mortals. No sooner had I wondered what he had made of their young as left with mankind in the form of changelings, then my eye caught a picture embodying that very thought. It was of an ancient Puritan interior, a heavily beamed room with lattice windows, a settle, and clumsy 17th century furniture, with a family sitting while the father read from scriptures. Every face but one showed nobility and reverence, but the one reflected a mockery of the pit. It was of a young man in years, and no doubt belonged to a supposed son of the pious father, but in essence it was the kin of the unclean things. It was their changeling. In a spirit of supreme irony, Pikmin had given it the features a very perceptible resemblance of his own. By this time, Pikmin had lighted a lamp in an adjoining room and was politely holding it open to the door, asking me if I would care to see his modern studies. I hadn't been able to give him much of my opinions. I was too speechless for fright and loathing. But I think he fully understood and felt highly complimented. And now I want to assure you again, Elliot, that I am no mollycoddle to scream at anything which shows a bit of departure from the usual. I'm middle-aged and decently sophisticated, and I guess you saw enough of me in France to know I'm not easily knocked out. Remember, too, I just about recovered my wind and gotten used to these frightful pictures, which turned colonial New England into a kind of annex of hell. Well, in spite of all this, that next room forced a real scream out of me. I had to clutch at the doorway to keep from keeling over. The other chamber had shown a pack of ghouls and witches overrunning the world of our forefathers, but this one brought the horror right into our own daily life. Gad, how that man could paint. There was a study called Subway Accident, in which a flock of vile things had clambered up from one of the unknown catacombs through a crack in the floor on Boylston Street subway and attacked a crowd of people on the platform. Oh, one second. News. Another showed a dance on Copp's Hill among the tombs with a background of today. And then there were a number of cellar views with monsters creeping in through the holes and rifts in the masonry, grinning as they squatted behind barrels or furnaces and waited for their first victim to descend the stairs. One disgusting canvas seemed to depict a vast cross-section of Beacon Hill, like ant armies of the mephitic monsters squeezing themselves through burrows that honeycombed the ground. Dances in the modern cemeteries were freely pictured, and another conception somehow shocked me more than the rest. A scene of an unknown vault where scores of beasts crowded around one who held a well-known Boston guidebook and was evidently reading it aloud. All were pointing to a certain passage, and every face seemed so distorted with epileptic and reverberant laughter that I almost thought I should hear the Phoenix echoes. The title of the picture was Holmes, Lowell, and Longfellow Lie Buried in Mount Auburn. As I gradually steadied myself and got readjusted to this second room of devilry and morbidity, I began to analyze some of the points in my sickening loathing. In the first place, I said to myself, These things repelled because of their utter inhumanity and callous cruelty they showed in Pikmin. These fellows must be a relentless enemy of all mankind to take glee in the torture of brain and flesh and the degradation of mortal tenement. In the second place, they terrified because of their very greatness. Their art was art that conceived. When we saw the pictures, we saw the demons themselves and were afraid of them. And the queer part was that Pikmin got none of his power from the use of selectiveness or bizarre. Nothing was blurred or distorted or convolutionalized. Yeah. Outlines were sharp and lifelike, and details were almost painfully defined. And the faces. It's not any mere artist's interpretation that we saw. It was pandemonium itself, crystal clear and stark objectivity. That was it, by heaven. The man was not a fantasy or romanticist at all. He did not even try to give us the churning, prismatic euphoria of dreams, but coldly and sardonically reflected some stable, mechanistic, and well-established horror world which he saw fully, brilliantly, squarely, and unflatteringly. God knows what that world could have been, or where he ever glimpsed these blasphemous shapes that loped and trotted and crawled through it. But whatever the baffling sources of his image, one thing is plain. Pikmin, in every sense, in conception and execution, was a thorough, painstaking, and almost scientific realist. My host was now leading the way down the cellar to his actual studio, and I braced myself for some hellish effects among the unfinished canvases. As we reached the bottom of the damp stairs, he turned his flashlight to a corner of the large open space at hand, revealing the circular brick curb of what was evidently a great well in the earthen floor. We walked nearer, and I saw that must have been 5 or 6 feet across, with the walls a good foot thick, some 6 inches above ground level. Solid work of the 17th century, or I am much mistaken. That, Pikmin said, was the kind of thing he had been talking about. An aperture of the network of tunnels that used to undermine the hill. I noticed idly it did not seem to be bricked up, and that the heavy disc of wood formed the apparent cover. Thinking of these things must well have been connected with, if Pikmin's wild hints had not been mere rhetoric. Thinking of the things this well must have been connected with, if Pikmin's wild hints had not been mere rhetoric, I shivered slightly and turned to follow him up a step and through a narrow door into a room of fair size, provided with a wooden floor and furnished as a studio. An acetylene gas outfit gave the light necessary for work. The unfinished pictures on easels or propped up against walls were as ghastly as the finished ones upstairs, and showed the painstaking methods of the artist. Scenes were blocked out with extreme care, and penciled guidelines told of minute exactitude which Pikmin used in getting the right perspective and proportions. The man was great. I say it even knowing as much as I do. A large camera on the table excited my notice, and Pikmin told me that he had used it in taking scenes for the backgrounds so that he might paint them from photographs in the studio instead of carting his outfit around the town for this or that view. He thought a photograph quite as good as an actual scene or model for sustained work, and declared he employed them regularly. There was something very disturbing about the nauseous sketches and half-finished monstrosities that leered around every side of the room, and when Pikmin suddenly unveiled a huge canvas on the side away from the light, I could not for the life of me keep back a loud scream. The second that I had emitted that night, it echoed and echoed in the grim vaultings of that ancient and nitrous cellar, and I had to choke back a flood of reaction that threatened to burst out as hysterical laughter. Merciful Creator, Elliot. But I don't know how much was real and how much was feverish fantasy. It doesn't seem to me that Earth can hold a dream like that. It was a colossal and nameless blasphemy with glaring red eyes that held in bony claws a thing that had been a man, gnawing at the head as a child nibbles at a stick of candy. Its position was a kind of crouch, and one that looked, but as one looked, one felt as if any movement might drop its prey and seek a juicier morsel. Damn it all, it wasn't the fiendish subject that made it such an immortal fountainhead of all panic. Not that, nor the dog face with its pointed ears, bloodshot eyes, flat nose, and drooling lips. Was it the scaly claws, or the mold-caked body, or the half-hooved feet? None of these. Although any one of them might well have driven an excitable man to madness. It was the technique, Elliot. The cursed, the imperious, the unnatural technique. As I am a living being, I never elsewhere saw the actual breath of life so fused into a canvas. The monster was there. It glared and gnawed and glared, and I knew only a suspicion of nature's laws could ever let a man paint a thing like that without a model, without some glimpse of the nether world which no mortal unsold to the fiend ever had. Pinned with a thumbtack to a vacant part of the canvas was a piece of paper now badly curled up, probably, I thought, a photograph from which Pickman meant to paint the background as hideous as nightmare it was to enhance. I reached out, uncurled, and took a look at it, when suddenly I saw Pickman start as if shot. He'd been leaning with particular intensity ever since my shocked scream, and had waked unaccustomed echoes in the dark cellar. Now he seemed struck with fright, which, although not comparable to my own, had in more of the physical than the spiritual. He drew a revolver and motioned me to silence, then stepped into the main cellar and closed the door behind him. I think I was paralyzed for an instant. Imitating Pickman's listening, I fancied I heard a faint scurrying sound somewhere, and squeals or bleats in that direction, in a direction I couldn't determine. I thought of huge rats and shuddered. Then there came a subdued sort of clatter, and somehow set me all gooseflesh. A furtive, groping kind of clatter, though I can't really convey what it means in words. It was like heavy wood falling on stone or brick. Wood on brick. What did that make me think of? It came again, and louder. There was a vibration as if the wood had fallen further than it had fallen before. After that followed a sharp grating noise, a shouted gibberish from Pickman, the deafening discharge of all 6 chambers of the revolver fired spectacularly, and as a lion tamer might fire in the air for effect. A muffled squeal or squawk and a thud. Then more wood and brick grating, a pause, and the opening of the door, at which I'll confess I started violently. Pickman reappeared with his smoking weapon, cursing the bloated rats that infested the ancient well. "The deuce knows what to eat, Thurber," he grinned. "For those archaic tunnels touched graveyards and witch den and sea coast, but whatever it is, they have run short, for they're devilish anxious to get out. Your yelling stirred them up, I fancy. Better be cautious in these old places. Our rodent friends are the one drawback, although sometimes I think they're a positive asset by way of atmosphere and color." Well, Elliot, that was the end of the night's adventure. Pickman had promised to show me the place, and heaven knows he had done it. He led me out of that tangle of alleys in another direction, it seems, for when we lighted the post, we were in a half-familiar street with monstrous rows of mangled tenements and blocks and old houses. Charter Street turned out to be, but I was too flustered to notice just where we hit it. We were too late for the elevated and walked back downtown through Hanover Street. I remember that walk. We switched from Tremont up Beacon, and Pickman left me at the corner of Joy, where I turned off. I never spoke to him again. Why did I drop him? Don't be impatient. I'll wait till I ring for coffee. We've had enough of the other stuff. But I may be in need for something. No, it wasn't the paintings. I saw
it wasn't the paintings I saw in that place, though. I'll swear they were enough to get him ostracized in 9/10 of the homes and clubs in Boston. And I guess you'll wonder why I have to steer clear of subways and cellars. It was something I found in my coat the next morning. You know the curled up paper tacked to that frightful canvas? That frightful canvas in the cellar? The thing I thought the photograph was of some scene he meant to use as a background for that monster. That last scare had come while I was reaching to uncurl it, and it seems I had vacantly crumpled in my pocket. But here's the coffee. Take it back, Elliot, if you're wise. Yes, that paper was the reason I dropped Pickman. Richard Upton Pickman, the greatest artist I have ever known, and the foulest being that ever leapt to the bounds of life from the pits of myth and madness, Elliot. Old Reed was right. He wasn't strictly human. Either he was born in strange shadow or he found a way to unlock a forbidden gate. It's all the same now, for he's gone back to the fabulous darkness he loved to haunt. Here, let's have a chandelier going. Don't ask me to explain or even conjecture about what I burned. Don't ask me either what lay behind that mole-like scrambling Pickman was so keen on passing off as rats. There are secrets, you know, which might have come down from old Salem's time, and Cotton Mather tells even stranger things. You know how damn lifelike Pickman's paintings were? How we all wondered where he got those faces? That paper wasn't a photograph of any background at all. What it showed was simply the monstrous being he painted in the awful canvas. It was a model he was using. Its background was merely the wall of the cellar in minute detail. By God, Elliot, it was a photograph from life. There we go. Pickman's model. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Little bit of wackiness. I feel like he's trying. This was early 1900s. Does it have a date? Give me 1 second. I will look. Pickman's model. Written in September of 1926. First published October of 1927 in an issue of Weird Times. Yeah. So actually, I heard about it because it was a I was watching some YouTube video on some show that had or a movie. It was that movie that what's his name that did Hellboy did. Anyway, it was kind of like a series of shorts, and one of them was essentially doing Pickman's novel. And so this was a YouTube video about it, and I was like, I need to read the original story because I had never heard of it either. And it's quite good. I like it. You can see where he's trying to tie to other things. So, for example, oh man, it's Saturn. Saturn devouring his son, right? Like there's clear callbacks to this, right? This of course is a well-known painting. And he's trying to do a little bit of the Nathaniel Hawthorne thing of referring constantly back to the witch trials and all these things. Hawthorne was honestly a better author when it came to things like talking about human nature and things like that. So while Lovecraft is really big on this, he tries to lean to horror. He's trying to do the Poe kind of thing. You definitely get hints of Poe in there. But and he does, to be fair, he does a good job, right? Oh man. There's also a similar thing in the second Amnesia game. Something with pig-like creatures like that. So I wonder how many of them are referencing this indirectly. Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Yeah, I kind of agree with that actually. So I like the framing, and I like the way it's a conversation, right? Of this person, like in this first person telling of the narrative, and yeah, after this is the problem with this kind of horror, right? And why you have to be very, very careful about it. And he does a better job in some of his other stories with it. Um, as soon as you show anything, it's not scary, right? The horror is in as absolute of this specifically of this type is in the unknown, because you can you can do horror of the grotesque, and he leans into that a little bit. Um, but it's really supposed to be the unusual and the unknown. And I think he keeps that mystery up until the very end. And I think I agree with you. I think it falls a little flat at the very end. But the beginning is really good. Like I said, I like the overall conceit and structure of the story. I think if he had been a little less explicit in the final section, yeah, like that was really cool. Um, he could have been vaguer, right? He didn't need to have the gunshots and the all that kind of stuff, right? He still could have found the picture in his pocket and not had the action scene, if you will. And it would have been fine, right? Um, and that kind of felt like it really hurried the story in a weird way. Because that would have been, yeah. So it's like a few edits away from being a really good story. I guess is the way that I would say it. Like it's a couple of edits away from being a classic, but it is fun. He does have a good style to him. Um, uh, but yeah, his racism, man. Woo, he was like I said, he was a very sad and unhappy person throughout his life, and I think he died of bowel cancer fairly early. Um, actually, there is an outstanding overview of H.P. Lovecraft. You know what? I have to go to the bathroom. Oh yeah, he hated everybody. Oh, hold on, 1 second. Spam call. Yay. He hated everyone. Um, he was. We should watch this. What we'll do is give me a second. Let me go to the bathroom, and then we're gonna go ahead and watch the Overly Sarcastic Productions overview of H.P. Lovecraft. I think it's a really fun watch. I love how they do things. But yeah, we can sit and watch it and talk it through. I really have to go to the bathroom because I just chugged an entire giant mug of tea. A mug, I might add, a mug, I might add, that I got in Salem, Massachusetts, and has the the background of Salem on it. So, a very apropos mug, which was entirely unintentional. It's just one of my favorite mugs. Salem, by the way, is awesome. It was actually also fun because I know where a lot of those places are in Boston. As he was like going, oh yeah, I know it. I know where that street is. But anyway, yes. So we'll do that, but in a second, I will be right back because I just chugged a whole lot of coffee. So we're gonna go ahead and do this, and I'm not gonna change the text. We'll just keep it there. There we go. There we go. There we go. There we go. Let me turn this off. Turn this off. There we go. Yeah. So, this comes from the category of horror that goes something like this. What if X thing that's normal was actually scary? Right? That's the general thought process behind it. You know, and you see this with modern movies too. What if we took X thing that everyone's used to seeing and made it scary? So this was his. What if we took? I'm just gonna do this so I don't accidentally dox myself somehow. What if we took painting and made it scary? Yay! Which I'll say, to my mind, almost any conceit could be made to work artistically if you do it right. What am I looking for? Right, overly OVERL. This will allow me to save my voice a little bit. You please, and we won't. Here we are.
First stories that brought.
Okay. Excellent. So when I do this now, when we go over to here, and we make this visible. Okay. Well, that's not gonna do. That's not gonna do at all. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna move me over into the little corner. Yes. Excellent. And make this, let's see, the right size or what it should be. Oops. Oh my goodness. What did I just do? How did... Oh, that broke it. Ah! Hold on. Goodness. Are you serious? Ugh. All right. Give me 1 second. I mucked up my OBS for a moment here. So let's see. We're gonna add a new browser. Okay. And now we're gonna go. Oh, will it really just do that? Okay.
First stories that brought themes of
That.
it would be inaccurate.
What else is going?
And moved into his wife's
Hold on.
which he hated
We're having.
in large part because New York is one of those places where immigrants happen. Oh yeah, the race.
Hold on 1 second.
Proper New England breeding was a major source of pride for him, and basically all of his stories had.
Whew. Okay. Let's try that again. Let's try that again with less insanity. All right. I know what we're gonna do. We're just gonna go add a full screen capture, which don't do this, kids. This is a bad idea. Display capture. There we go. Oops. Back. There we go. And now, nope. Yep. There we go. Okay. Okie dokie. But where'd it go? Hello? I'm going to flip my freaking lid. What is going on? Yeah. If I do that. Why is this all behind? Does it have something to do with this? No, not really. This is weird. Oh, this is so weird. Why is it not showing this new? How about if I transition? Whoa, okay. Noted. Okay. All right. Well, we almost got there. 1 second. Pardon me. Excuse me. Moving through. Okay. And almost. There we are. And I will move myself over here. I'll make myself smaller, move myself over here, where I am not blocking the text. I'm just peeking out. There we go. Okay. Let's get chat about this too. There we go. It's alive. We have chat. All right. More like the Hang King SCP. Exactly. Hang King interpretation. Yeah. So the Hang King wasn't actually Lovecraft. It was geez, what's his name? He was slightly after Lovecraft, and clearly like influenced by him. Or the King in Yellow, I should say. I can't remember his name. Anyway, so you were able to hear, so I just want to make sure that we have audio properties. Okay, let me just make sure we have audio. Excellent, we have audio. And that did that. Okay, cool. All right. So this, I really like Overly Sarcastic Productions. They are amazing. And this is their overview of H.P. Lovecraft.
It would be inaccurate to describe Howard Phillips Lovecraft as a man with issues. It's more like he was a bundle of issues shambling around in a roughly bipedal approximation of a man. Chronically depressed, hypersensitive to criticism, almost certainly agoraphobic, prone to horrible nightmares and nervous breakdowns, and thoroughly racist even by the standards of the time, it'd be easy to come to the conclusion that H.P. Lovecraft was simply afraid of everything. But this isn't true either. He was just afraid of everything that wasn't his hometown of Providence, Rhode Island. Lovecraft is famous for codifying the Lovecraftian horror mythos, a cosmology he created with centralized themes of cosmic horror, ancient unknowable and malevolent gods, and everything smelling vaguely of fish. Lovecraft's writing is famous these days for producing an overwhelming sense of sheer hopeless terror at an unfeeling cosmos, wrapped up in visceral descriptions of omnipresent rot and decay, all themes that manage to make perfect sense when contextualized with Lovecraft's life story, which was pretty much a depressing downward spiral from minute one. Lovecraft was born in 1890 to one of those well-off New England families that still thought of themselves as proper English semi-nobility, an image that became harder and harder to maintain due to their perpetual state of financial decline. Lovecraft was intermittently schooled but never really finished his education, and had access to a decent library with pretty nifty scientific texts, but had too delicate of a constitution for math, and as such made no progress beyond the basics in any of his fields of scientific study, which explains his thorough misunderstanding of non-Euclidean geometry, non-visible light, and the concept of an air conditioner. His mother was institutionalized in 1918, but unfortunately we have no idea what was actually wrong with her because the medicine of the time had a tendency to exclusively diagnose women with hysteria, aka being a woman disease. When she died in 1921, Lovecraft took it really hard, got severely depressed, and started writing The Call of Cthulhu, one of the first stories that brought themes of existential horror into his developing mythos. Lovecraft's lack of marketable skills stopped being much of a problem for him when he married a breadwinner businesswoman in 1924, and moved into his wife's apartment in Brooklyn, which he hated more than anything, in large part because New York is one of those places where immigrants happen. Oh yeah, the racism. So Lovecraft's proper New England breeding was a major source of pride for him, and basically all of his stories have seriously classist and racist themes, with his heroes being well-educated white dudes with no phonetically transcribed accents, and his villains being literally everybody else. This being good old English racism, he cared less about skin color directly and more about breeding overall, so there's a number of white people bad guys too, albeit uneducated, inbred, and poor, but it's no accident a lot of his horror is derived from people crossbreeding with other races. Part of this might have been Lovecraft's clear and obvious discomfort and disinterest with all things sexual, but there's also a bunch of racism wrapped up in there. Lovecraft eventually got overwhelmed by the horror of the outside world and moved back home to Providence, lived on a dwindling inheritance for the rest of his life, and died almost completely unknown from intestinal cancer at age 46. Overall, an unpleasant life steeped in mundane misery and crippled by fear at every turn. With the context of Lovecraft's overwhelming disgust and horror for everything he didn't understand, almost his entire body of work begins to make sense. The thing that makes Lovecraftian horror, and the thing that's kept it popular, is this overwhelming fear of the unknown, a concept that easily translates even as the unknown changes with social and scientific developments. Even though Lovecraft's works haven't aged well at all, the underlying principle is sound. If you don't fully understand something, you can interpolate existential horror and turn every mystery into a nightmare of things man was not meant to know. And separate from that, the aesthetic of horror he chose is also pretty effective on its own. Lovecraft's overwhelming fear of the ocean produced a memorable and viscerally nasty horror aesthetic grounded in slime and rot that was far removed from the cold stone sterility of the previous gothic horror genre. So, all that in mind, let's take a look at a few of the genre-defining short stories cranked out from Horrible Phobias Lovecraft's darkest nightmares.
Phobias Lovecraft.
The Call of Cthulhu is framed as a first-person account from one Francis Wayland Thurston, whose venture into the unknown begins as he's going through the notes left by his great-uncle George Angel, a professor at Brown who recently died under mysterious circumstances. The notes describe a series of interactions between Angel and one Henry Anthony Wilcox, an artist and known airhead who's recently taken to dreaming of ancient sunken cities. An earthquake hit New England on February 28, and that night, Henry had this crazy dream that he was navigating an ancient, creepy city covered in green ooze and hieroglyphs, and from the depths of the structure echoed a very spooky voice saying something about Cthulhu in a language he didn't understand. Angel is disproportionately concerned about this dream, and asks if Henry is, by any chance, part of a cult. But Henry's just your average clean-cut New England artist dreaming of things beyond mortal ken. He comes in daily with new dreams, all in the same city, but sometimes different parts of it, and with the same spooky voice saying spooky stuff, until one day, March 23rd, when he doesn't come in at all, because as it turns out, Henry's become very sick and has been deliriously yelling about some giant monster. 9 days later, Henry abruptly gets better and stops having the dreams entirely. Angel launches an investigation, polling a large population for reports of what their dreams were like during the interval when Henry was all wonky. He discovers that salt-of-the-earth working-class folk were totally unaffected, sciencey types had the occasional nightmare, and artists and poets were almost incapacitated by their crazy nightmares. Many of them dreamt of the same city as Henry, along with the same ominous chanting he reported. Overall, the interval between February 28th and April 2nd saw a worldwide spike in madness, mania, and general unrest. That's pretty spooky all on its own, but it turns out Angel had asked Henry about cult activity for a reason. This wasn't his first run-in with the name Cthulhu. 17 years prior, in 1908, Angel is attending an academic archaeological get-together when hard-boiled New Orleans cop Inspector Legrasse crashes the party with an ancient and creepy statuette they recently confiscated from a particularly nasty cult, and they need to know what it means. The statuette looks like a weird half-human, half-octopus, half-dragon thing. The archaeologists pass it around, but nobody can identify the culture of origin and nobody can read the glyphs. The one dude claims he's dealt with a tribe of devil worshippers who seem to have worshipped a similar figure. When asked where the heck he got this statue, Legrasse explains they'd gotten some reports from some friendly swamp-dwelling New Orleansers that some seriously freaky stuff was happening in the swamp, and their women and children kept getting kidnapped. The cops crashed the party and found a large number of very naked cultists dancing around a burning monolith with the statuette on top, surrounded by the extremely dead bodies of all those kidnapped swamp people. Oh, but don't worry, circa 1920s New England readers. I know you want to know the exact ethnic backgrounds and skin color of these cultists before you render moral judgment. Well, don't you worry, Lovecraft has you covered. We've got some Native Americans, some black people, some biracial people, some ethnically ambiguous folk thrown in for flavor, and basically everybody who's definitely not a white people. I won't say Lovecraft got subtler about his deep, abiding loathing and terror of anyone with a skin tone darker than Pantone 727, but this is probably the most all-inclusive it ever gets in his writing. Anyway, Lovecraft's charmingly diverse death cult explains that they worship the great old ones, ancient gods who predate humanity and are currently dead, but still dreaming, and through their dreams can communicate with humanity, which is how they facilitated the formation of this ancient globe-spanning cult in the first place. The old ones are currently all preserved in the ancient city of Relay, which sunk into the ocean a while back, which makes it harder for them to psychically bump up with humanity. Cthulhu is the name of one of the old ones, specifically the one playing nanny to all the others while they're dead and waiting for the stars to align so they can come back. So our narrator Francis understands why Angel was so freaked out at hearing the name Cthulhu 17 years after dealing with the murder cult, but is pretty sure this must have been some kind of practical joke, and decides to start investigating on his own. Also, he begins to suspect Angel might have been killed by the cult, because shortly before he died, he bumped into A black guy. I can't stress enough how hard it is to read this today. After retracing Angel's contacts to try and flesh out the story, he finds a newspaper article dated to the same time frame as Henry's crazy dreams that talks about a derelict ship found adrift at sea with a single survivor on board. A man named Johansson, who you know you can trust because he's Norwegian, aka very, very white. According to the article, Johansson claimed the ship had been attacked by a yacht full of suspicious not white people, but they managed to kill all of them, board the yacht, and sailed along its original course, whereupon they landed on an island that didn't appear on any map. 6 of the crew members somehow died, and Johansson and one other made it back to the boat, at which point the other one died too. Francis bounces around the globe a bit trying to locate this Johansson, who he finds tragically died quite recently, but conveniently left a whole lot of notes for him to sift through. Hooray! So the notes are basically just Johansson's horrified recollection of his harrowing ordeal, which fills in what the newspaper left out. The ship lands on an island that shouldn't exist, surprise surprise, the topmost part of Relay, and as they explore, the sailors note that the island is extremely spooky because all of its architecture is non-Euclidean. For those of you with a Lovecraftian level geometry education, non-Euclidean geometry is just geometry on a curved surface. You may note, since we live on a globe, all of our geometry is non-Euclidean. Anyway, the island's terrifying geometry notwithstanding, the sailors soldier on until they encounter a very big door. Following, I guess, video game logic, the sailors agree that opening this very big door sounds like a fun idea, and surprise, surprise, Cthulhu comes out. Way to do the cult's job for him, geniuses. So 2 of the sailors die of fright, 1 trips on a corner and clips through the map, and 3 of them get squished. Johansson and 1 other guy exit pursued by Cthulhu, and once in the boat, Johansson, brave Snow White Norwegian that he is, turns the boat around and rams the pursuing Cthulhu right in his big jelly face. It smells awful, there's jelly everywhere, but as the boat retreats, Cthulhu is seen pulling himself back together, because if you could kill an elder god the same way you kill a rampaging Disney villain, most of Lovecraft's stories would have very different tones. Anyway, Johansson's hair turns white from the shock, his crew member looked at Cthulhu for too long and went crazy, and that's where the story ends. Relay evidently sunk back under the sea since the island is gone, and Francis wraps up the story by contemplating how now that he knows so much about Cthulhu, it seems likely that his evil death cult is probably going to be gunning for him any day now. Oh no! How will he be able to function in polite society if he's cripplingly paranoid that every not white person he runs into might be trying to... I'm just kidding, it's 1920s rural America, no one will notice. Cool Air was written while Hippopotamus Lovecraft was living in New York City, and consequently takes place in a crowded apartment building full of immigrants, every element of which the narrator hates. Even worse, one night something gross starts leaking through his ceiling, and the landlady explains a reclusive and mysterious doctor, homebound due to a lasting illness, lives in the apartment above him and must have spilled one of his chemicals. The knowledge that his upstairs neighbor is a doctor becomes relevant when our narrator randomly has a heart attack one day and scoots upstairs for some pro bono medical attention. He finds that his neighbor, Dr. Munoz, is a very tidy and well-groomed dude, who our narrator judges as being of superior blood and breeding, but he keeps his apartment really cold for some reason and also comes across as inexplicably creepy, talking the whole time he's treating our narrator, but seemingly never pausing for breath. Place your bets now, folks. Anyway, Munoz tells the narrator not to be too down about his poor health, since modern science is incredible and can sustain a human body almost indefinitely. He himself has had a complex bouquet of medical issues for the past 18 years, which is why he keeps his apartment so cold and rarely leaves. Fun fact, this story was written only a few years after air conditioning began to become a widespread phenomenon in major US cities, which is probably why Munoz takes the time to explain how exactly his cooling system works and also why Hates Progress Lovecraft is so scared of it. Anyway, the narrator likes having such interesting company and routinely returns for visits and conversation, though he does notice that the doctor's health continues to deteriorate, and he does increasingly frantic modifications to the AC in order to compensate. He winds up looking so creepy that he gives a hardened war veteran a seizure just by looking at him. Basically, homeboy's face is jacked. Then one warm night mid-October, the air conditioner breaks, and the doctor freaks out and locks himself in the bathroom while he sends the narrator out to bring him as much ice as he can manage, as well as arrange for repairs to the air pump. The narrator subcontracts a dude to keep the ice coming while he runs off to find repair people, but when he returns to the house, it's in total chaos. Apparently, the ice guy got curious and looked into the bathroom, then ran screaming from the building. Upon investigation, a trail of God knows what leads from the bathtub to the writing desk and then dead ends in a pile of something horrible on the couch. It's so horrible, the narrator doesn't even want to describe it, attempting to preserve the horror of the unknown, even though at this point we all know it's the doctor. Anyway, he wrote out a last confession about how he's been dead for 18 years and staved off decay through the cold and a lot of chemicals, but now thanks to the failure of modern technology, death has finally come for him. Yay! At this point, most of us learn the basics of the electromagnetic spectrum somewhere in middle school. You got that little zone of visible light, and then a huge amount of radiation our eyes can't perceive, from gamma rays up through radio waves. Since we can only see such a thin slice of the spectrum, our concept of color is very limited compared to the full spectrum of light, but it's kind of what we're stuck with. But if you told Lovecraft about the wide spectrum of light humans can't see, he'd get a funny look on his face, say something like, "You mean there exist colors that man has never seen? What might they be capable of?" and go write The Color Out of Space, a story about a color of demonstrably visible light that is nonetheless nowhere nowhere on the visible spectrum. This is what happens when you don't have the constitution for math. Anyway, the narrator of The Color Out of Space is a surveyor examining an area in the middle of nowhere, Massachusetts, because they're planning on diverting a reservoir there. During his meanderings, he comes to an area referred to as a blasted heath. It almost looks like it was burned, but nothing ever grew back. The trees around the edges are sick and rotting, the plants are all growing weird, there's an inexplicably creepy well in the middle, and the narrator wisely decides to head back to town and prompt some NPCs to fill him in on the regional lore. Conveniently, the area has a local old crazy person, always a goldmine of information in a Lovecraft story. This one named Amy Pierce, who's more than happy to regale him with colorful tales of horror.
It was.
So the story begins with a meteorite crash landing by the well in the otherwise sedate and charming forest estate of one Nahum Gardner, a friendly farmer with an idyllically charming family. Some folks from the nearby Miskatonic University swing by to examine the meteorite and are surprised at its small size. Nahum says it's shrunk since it landed, and also it glows in the dark and hasn't cooled down since the impact. The Miskatonic folks attempt to break off some samples, but find the meteorite is soft like plastic and gouges rather than being chipped. They take it away for tests, then come back for more because the material is reacting very strangely to everything they do to it, and also vanished completely overnight. As they carve out another chunk, they hit a little bubble in the rock. It's a small embedded glob with a mysterious color, unlike any seen on Earth, and when they hit it with a hammer, it pops and disappears. The next day, they come back for more meteor, but find it's completely vanished. A storm blew in overnight and struck the rock with lightning over half a dozen times, and apparently that made it stop existing. Nahum is, of course, an instant celebrity on account of the magic rock, and as a bonus, all his crops are growing in really big and glossy. But when the time comes to harvest them, Nahum finds they're all completely inedible. They've got a nasty aftertaste, unlike any seen on Earth, and they have to scrap the whole crop. The animals around the farm also start growing weird. Nahum's family is on edge, and everyone's basically avoiding the farm with the quiet understanding that whatever the meteor did to it wasn't good. All the trees start blooming in mysterious colors, unlike any seen, and they seem to move on their own without any wind. The Gardner family basically holes up in the farm and has a collective silent nervous breakdown. Nobody's even surprised when Mrs. Gardner goes crazy and gets locked in the attic, and also starts glowing in the dark. Just move away! All the plants in the area start turning gray and disintegrating, and though Pierce warns the Gardners that the well water started tasting suspicious, they keep drinking it anyway. Then one of the kids goes crazy and starts screaming about colors in the well, unlike any, and gets locked in the attic too. Then the crazy kid dies somehow, and the youngest kid vanishes when going out to get well water one night. After 2 weeks of radio silence, Pierce finally works up the nerve to see how Nahum's doing and finds him ill and delirious and very much alone. Pierce goes to check in on the wife and finds something indescribably horrifying curled up in the corner, leaking mysterious colors unlike any seen on Earth, and writes her off as pretty thoroughly dead. When he heads downstairs, he hears some pretty disgusting noises, plus a sploosh from the well outside. He also notices the house glows in the dark now, and finds a very disintegrating Nahum has dragged himself to the base of the stairs for some last-minute exposition. He explains that mysterious color, etc., is alive and living in the well, and is sucking the life out of everything around it. It came out of the meteor, those weird color globs were probably seeds, and they've been feeding on the family and their farm as they grew. Anyway, Nahum dies, and Pierce gets the heck out of there to report the deaths. He returns with some investigators, they investigate the well, and find a whole lot of skeletons, including the 2 missing children, plus some weird spongy junk at the bottom, unlike any seen on. And then everything starts freaking out. The horses freak out, the trees freak out, everything starts glowing, and the crew wisely decide to vacate the area before anything else happens. As they exit the glow radius, they see a lot of mysterious colors, unlike any, erupting out of the well, and then the entire area lights up and the light blasts into space, leaving nothing but the blasted heat. But Pierce reveals one final scrap of horror. As the light left, he saw one weaker blob of light try and fail to escape the well before falling back in. It's still down there, which is why he's so spooked, and also so glad the area will soon be entirely underwater. Narrator guy, thoroughly creeped out, decides to never drink the water from this reservoir, and also briefly contemplates if Pierce is still being affected by the horrible color, and whether that would explain why he's never even left the area. If there's one thing Lovecraft hates more than not...
So I will say, I have read that story, and it gets pretty wacky towards... I can see why that would make a good movie. It gets pretty wild towards the end. Like, very end of a Hollywood movie-esque.
White people, it's the crushing existential terror he feels every time he leaves the house. If there's one thing he hates slightly less, it's low-class white people. This story is narratorless and takes place entirely in the rural Massachusetts town of Dunwich, an old town that smells bad and is generally creepy and off-putting. The story begins when Wilbur Whately is born on February 2nd, 1913 to Lavinia Whately, an albino, deformed, inbred woman who likes wandering the hills and hanging out in creepy stone circles. Her father is Old Whately, sometimes referred to as Wizard Whately due to his large collection of creepy occult books. As for who Wilbur's father is, well, that's not exactly clear, and Old Whately is being ominously cryptic about the whole thing. But this is Lovecraft cryptic, so it doesn't take a genius to put together from his mutterings that Wilbur's dad is something named Yog-Sothoth. Anyway, shortly after Wilbur is born, the Whateleys board up one of the sheds and also start buying a lot of cows, although oddly they never seem to have a lot of cows, and the ones they do have look really anemic and seem to have weird marks on their necks. Alright, place your bets everyone. So Wilbur grows preternaturally fast and can talk and walk at 11 months old, but he's also super ugly and goat looking and really neurotic about never being seen naked. Also dogs hate him, so you know he's evil. So Old Whately keeps doing house repairs and at one point builds a big ramp up to the second floor from the outside. This is also around the same time that locked shed gets opened. Now, the story pretends like this is a mystery, but we've all put together that there's something unspeakable in the shed and Whately relocated it to the house. Got it? Good, moving on. So now the shed is empty except for a horrible smell. Wilbur is 4 but looks 10 and is taken to carrying a gun to shoot any and all dogs that randomly attack him during his daily goings-on. In case you were wondering if you were supposed to like it. Also, people keep hearing mysterious sounds coming from the sealed-up second floor of the Whately house. You know, where they put the horrible thing from the shed. What a mystery this is. Anyway, twice yearly, Wilbur and Lavinia do weird rituals on one of the nearby hills with a stone circle. Wilbur and old Whately continue to remodel the house, by which I mean they knock out every wall on the second floor, clearly because the horrible whatever is growing bigger. And then old Whately has an attack of some kind and dies, but not before expositing in the longest death monologue ever about how Wilbur will need to be careful to take care of the thing in the house, and that then he'll be able to open up the gates to Yog-Sothoth with the chant you'll find on page 751 of your textbook. Anyway, he dies, Wilbur continues to grow hella fast, and Lavinia is actually getting scared of him now. She vanishes one Halloween, probably because of the giant horrible monster in the Whately house, just a guess obviously, and Wilbur relocates all his stuff into the shed and knocks out all the remaining walls in the house for reasons I can't possibly fathom. Anyway, Wilbur, who now looks fully adult and is about 10 feet tall, seems to be getting a little desperate. See, he has a copy of the Necronomicon, but it's damaged and incomplete, and is in fact missing the crucial page 751. So he starts shopping around nearby universities trying to locate an undamaged copy. When he heads to Miskatonic University, the librarian Dr. Armitage happens to look over his shoulder while he's examining the page and notices a lot of conveniently expositional lore about the old ones and how they exist in the spaces between reality, and that this Yog-Sothoth character is the key and the guardian of the gate, and can bring the old ones out of the spaces between and into reality again. Armitage is very creeped out, and when Wilbur asks to take the book with him, Armitage refuses and also warns all the other universities in the area to turn him away. Armitage immediately starts researching Wilbur and the old ones, and while he's at that, an increasingly desperate Wilbur breaks into Miskatonic University to steal the Necronomicon. Unfortunately, Wilbur runs afoul of the university's guard dog, who completely wrecks him, and upon finding the dying Wilbur, the horrible truth is revealed. He looks really nasty. Specifically, the only human parts of him are his face and hands. His chest and back are scaly, and below the waist he goes completely bonkers, covered in coarse black fur, with weird mouth tentacles hanging from his waist, eyeballs on his hips, a tailed trunk thing, and crazy hoof pad feet. Wilbur dies muttering something about Yog-Sothoth, and his body completely disintegrates, showing the horrified onlookers that apparently he had no bones. Anyway, everyone's super creeped out already, but then the night of September 9th, about a month after shit goes down in Miskatonic University, shit goes sideways in Dunwich, as whatever was growing in the Whately house got too big and too hungry to stay put, and is now rampaging around town. And it's also invisible, which certainly doesn't make things easier on anyone. Back at Miskatonic University, Armitage and the other professors have been trying to decrypt Wilbur's diary and figure out what the heck is going on with the monster he keeps talking about, when they learn, via an innocuous newspaper article, that it's broken loose. So they march over to Dunwich to find that the rampaging monster has crushed and eaten at least one family house, and seems to spend its days lurking in the glen while going out to feed at night. A quick headcount suggests that the local cops went down to the glen to bother it and got eaten, but the professors are much better prepared. Armitage has some Latin spells, Rice has a bug sprayer full of magic not being invisible anymore juice, and Morgan just brought a really big gun. That night nothing happens, but the next day the monster eats another farmhouse, and Armitage rallies the dudes to go after it. When they see it moving on the hillside, Armitage and the other professors break off from their crew of terrified villagers who observe the goings-on through a telescope. The one unlucky guy with the telescope gets to see the de-invisible monster and immediately, but descriptively, panics and starts yelling out adjectives. Anyway, as they watch, they see the professors head for the stone circle and yell something in Latin, and the monster responds by shrieking a lot about Yog-Sothoth in a very much not English language, before transitioning to English to scream for help before it gets struck by lightning and disappears. The professors return and broadly explain that the monster couldn't really exist in normal reality since it was half Yog-Sothoth, so they magicked it into not really existing anymore. Anyway, Mr. I looked through the telescope and saw the face of madness starts yelling that the monster had a huge face and it looked like the Whateleys, and yeah, the big plot twist is the giant blob monster was Wilbur's twin brother, though he looked a lot more like his old man. Now, so far,
it's so cute, right? Look at him. Look at the eyes. Look at the eyes. Just a little potato.
though he looked a lot more like his old man. Now, so far, most of Lovecraft's narrators, if they exist at all, are horrified onlookers to an otherwise fairly distant nightmare. They'll find notes about it, or interview the people who actually lived it, or live next door to the monster and completely miss all the excitement. The Shadow over Innsmouth, written closer to the end of Lovecraft's life and well after he moved back to Providence, is a serious departure from form in that the narrator and main character, Robert Olmsted, is point blank on the action and, in fact, personally invested in the story. So the story begins with Robert warning us that he's breaking a long and government-mandated silence about what exactly happened in Innsmouth in 1927, and
so it's interesting that she says that, because the one that we read, the narrator was like the main character in the story, right? It was all essentially a transcription of his narration of what's going on. So it's interesting that that's something he didn't do earlier. And I think that the one we read was from the 20s, so it was from towards the end of his life too. I wonder if it was the same same set of stories.
You'll see why he's breaking that silence when he explains what's up. His narrative starts with him traveling along on a tour of New England, where his mother is from, trying to get in touch with his roots and research his family tree a little bit. However, being broke or thrifty or something, he's attempting to take the cheapest route possible, and this is how he hears about Innsmouth in the first place. There's a very cheap bus route that runs through it, mostly because nobody goes there. The dude expositing this tells Robert, completely unprompted, and it goes on for pages, that Innsmouth used to be a decent town, but had recently fallen into ruin after a nasty epidemic wiped out a lot of the population. All they do is fish, except for one gold refinery ran by an old man Marsh, who was the grandson of one Captain Obed Marsh, who supposedly had a lot of trade with South Sea Islanders, and maybe married one of them, although it's confusingly worded. People in the general area tend to be ashamed and cover up any Innsmouth heritage they have, and while Exposition Dude notes that Marsh's descendants all look pretty normal, Old Man Marsh himself has supposedly developed some kind of skin condition or deformity in his old age. Innsmouth has a lot of nasty old rumors about it, including devil worship and some stuff about a very spooky reef in the Innsmouth harbor called Devil's Reef. Exposition Man says most of the hate is probably race prejudice, but he can't say he disagrees with it, so props for self-awareness, I guess? Anyway, he says most Innsmouth people look kind of weird with like big bulgy eyes and stuff, and they tend to go bald really young. And place your bets, everyone. So yeah, Innsmouth is weird and private and they don't like strangers, but the bus is really cheap, so what are you gonna do? Robert does a little more research and finds a piece of very weird-looking gold jewelry covered in weird oceanic designs and fish-frog humanoid monsters. The curator mentions that the Marsh family keeps trying to get this piece back, and she suspects it might be part of some obscure pirate hoard found by Obed ages ago. She also explains that the devil worship rumors aren't completely unfounded, since the locals have apparently taken to worshipping Dagon, who in real mythology is a Mesopotamian grain and fertility god, but in Lovecraft land is a fish demon nightmare thing. Anyway, our hero Robert What Are Warning Bells Olmsted hops on the bus the next day and is immediately creeped out by the bus driver, who is very distinctively ugly. Big bulging eyes, receding forehead and chin, overall fishy look, and also smells really bad. I'm sure it's nothing. Anyway, Robert begins his walking tour of Innsmouth and finds the place very creepy, very smelly, very empty, and very inhospitable. He notices that almost everyone looks similarly fishy to the bus driver, and hops into a general store to try and find someone who seems remotely normal. Luckily, the storekeep is a 17-year-old normal guy from Arkham, Massachusetts, who is also uncomfortable in town. He warns Robert to be careful where he wanders and to stay away from the churches. He also fills in some exposition.
I will add also that the whole Arkham thing in Batman comes from Lovecraft.
The other guy missed. The old people always look way nastier than the young people, and despite spending a lot of time in town, he doesn't really know any of the Innsmouth people. They all keep to themselves. In fact, the only person Robert has a hope of getting exposition from is one Zadok Allen, a normal-looking 96-year-old man who spends his days wandering the town, getting really drunk, and muttering ominously to himself. Fulfilling his role of video game NPC, the storekeep draws a map for Robert and sends him on his way. Robert locates Zadok, lures him into an abandoned part of town with a bottle of booze, and gets him talking. Zadok is a drunken fountain of exposition. Hooray! More of this! And starts at the very beginning with tales of Obed Marsh, who starts off his exploits by sailing to a South Sea island he heard had disproportionately good fish hauls and luxurious but creepy gold jewelry. Obed learns that these people are sacrificing their young men and women to some kind of underwater fish people community thing and getting all kinds of favor in return, including fish and gold. The fish people also come up to the surface twice a year to mate with the humans, having told them that their kids will start off looking human but will gradually become more fish-like until they become full fish people and can live underwater full time. Also, being a fish person means you're immortal unless directly killed, which is a pretty sweet deal, kind of. At this point, you can close the book because you've basically got Innsmouth figured out, but let's stick with the story for funsies. So Obed maintains very lucrative trade with this island for years until one year when he returns to find the island completely destroyed by the neighboring islands, who caught wind of their shape of water shenanigans and burned them to the ground. This is bad for Obed, since his other trade routes aren't doing so hot, and if he stops raking in the cash, Innsmouth stops prospering. So instead, Obed uses some stuff he learned from the Fish Island people to make contact with some fish people right off the coast of Innsmouth, at Devil's Reef in fact, and renounces the Christian god to start worshipping Dagon and raking in the fish and gold. Of course, this isn't a unilaterally positive decision, especially due to the string of disappearances required to maintain the fish people deal. And after a while, the townspeople revolt and Obed and his cult are arrested. A couple weeks after that, however, the fish people erupt out of the harbor and descend on the town, enraged due to the lack of sacrifices. They wipe out over half the town, which is the so-called epidemic from the history books, and Obed takes over and goes full crazy, including leading into the start banging the fish people thing. Zadok mentions how Obed took a second wife who was obviously a fish lady since she was literally never seen in public, and they had 3 kids together. One of whom looked perfectly normal, was educated in Europe, and then went to live and get married in Arkham. She's basically the only only Innsmouth person to have ever left. Anyway, Obed eventually died, but Old Man Marsh is still kicking and probably only a few years away from a full fishy transformation. Zadok starts getting increasingly manic and tells Robert that the fish people are planning something and they've been bringing stuff out of the water and hiding it in the abandoned old houses. He also name drops Shoggoths, a Lovecraftian stable that are basically big blob monsters with lots of eyes and mouths. Anyway, then Zadok freaks out because he sees something swimming for shore, orders Robert to get the heck out of town because now they know he knows too much, and then runs screaming into the town and is never seen again. Robert nervously heads back to the bus, but wouldn't you know it, it's got sudden engine trouble, and Robert has no choice but to stay the night in the Gilman Hotel. The Gilman... Okay. So Robert gets a room, but is too hopped up on adrenaline to get any rest, in part because his door bolt was removed and he spent some time replacing it, which is good because a few hours into his stay, he starts hearing someone trying to get into his room. This is when Robert wisely decides the time has come to get the heck out of Dodge and manages to escape through a window while an increasing horde of not very human-sounding people try to batter down the doors. Robert makes it down to street level and sees a very large crowd of very fishy-looking people streaming out of the hotel carrying lanterns, clearly looking for him but with no idea of where he went. So he starts trying to Metal Gear his way out of town, and upon realizing they're going to be blocking off his means of escape, decides to try and follow the abandoned train tracks out of town towards Arkham, hoping they won't be guarded. He imitates the Innsmouth fishy shuffle to avoid attracting attention, and manages to make it to the tracks before he has to hide in the undergrowth to avoid a large and very not human procession of fully fishified Innsmouth folk tramping down the road looking for him. Overwhelmed by the incomprehensibleness of it all, Robert passes out and awakens conveniently not dead the next morning, at which point he jets over to Arkham, gets cleaned up, and then goes straight to the authorities. What follows is a series of raids on Innsmouth, including a lot of arrests and at least one torpedo fired into Devil's Reef. But while all this is going down, Robert's not quite done. See, he does a little genealogical research and finds out that one Marsh daughter who married an Arkham dude was actually his great-grandmother, and he is part fishman. He starts having weird dreams where he communicates with his fish lady grandmother and great-great-grandmother, who tell him his destiny is to live with them in luxury under the sea until the day when they rise up, consume the surface world, and worship the old ones when they return. Robert is surprisingly on board with this, and when he wakes up to discover he's acquired the trademark Innsmouth look, he decides to do this ASAP, and also to break out a cousin of his who was put in a sanatorium 4 years ago for a disfiguring illness he now understands was just fish puberty. I can't help but feel like this story would be written very differently in today's culture of hot fish people. The seaweed is always greener in somebody else's lake.
Anyway, I highly advise watching a bunch of the rest of their videos. They're really funny, they're really good, and they're really informative. So he did a lot of them that are like old. Yeah, it's so funny, and the animations are really good. I think she does them herself, but she has a lot of old ones about myths, like classic myths from all over the world. She's got some where she talks about different writing tropes and things like that. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Definitely worth going through there. It's Overly Sarcastic Productions. Oh, all right. I'm gonna hold on one sec. Just want to do this, and I want to go into dish, and I want to go into dish, and we go into dish, and we go. All right. Overly Sarcastic Productions is the name of their YouTube video, or their new YouTube channel. There's 2 of them usually. The guy does kind of history videos. He's not. I don't think he's quite as funny or informative as she is, but you know, they both do. They're fun. Anyway, I think that has been quite a stream, actually. Yeah, it's been 2 hours and a half. Woo! We read some of The Hobbit. We read the H.P. Lovecraft story, and then we watched the video about H.P. Lovecraft. So, at any rate, I think I am going to cut it off here. Let you go to sleep, Mark, because I'm sure it's ungodly o'clock. Well, thank you. Next Wednesday we'll do some more reading. I don't know of what, but we'll figure it out. Yeah, go to sleep, dude. In the meantime, our next official stream is what's today? Wednesday? Next official stream is Friday.
when we will do more mathy math things. There is a decent chance of an unofficial spur of the moment gaming stream tomorrow, but we'll see. So otherwise, I will see you all later. Have a wonderful night. Get some rest, some sleep today, Mark. Thank you so much for coming by. I really appreciate it. As always, this is a lot of fun. And I'll catch you around. If I can find the... Okay, goodbye. Be nice to each other. Be nice